Okay, so now we're at the final stage of our post-processing, and so what we want to do is we want to flatten our image into one layer so that we can make our final changes in that one layer. So there's two ways of doing that. The first way is there's a shortcut we can use to take all of our artwork layers, and it just puts it into one layer. And so the way we do that is we click on our topmost layer in our layers panel, and then we use the shortcut Control Alt Shift E. And what that does is it takes the whole artwork and flattens it into one layer. So on PC it's Control Alt Shift E, and on Mac I believe it is Control Command Shift E. And once you do that, you right click on this layer and convert it to a smart object. And then I'm just going to double click on the title and just name it Final. So that's the first thing we do. The other way you can do it is you can click on your topmost layer and then hold Shift and select all of your layers and put them into a group. And we can just name that artwork. And then we duplicate that group by clicking on Duplicate Group and just hit OK. So it's basically just going to create another copy of that entire group. So once that finishes, you can just right click on your group and click on Merge Group. And so what that has done then is basically the same thing. It's now merged that group, like that full artwork, into one layer. And so again, you can just right click on that, convert to smart object, and then just we can have the name as artwork final just to differentiate. But you can see the layers are exactly the same. So that was just to demonstrate the two methods of flattening out your artwork. So I'm just going to delete that artwork that we created. I'm just going to save my file. Okay, so once it's saved, we are going to click on our final layer here, and we are going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. So I'm just going to touch on some of the most important aspects of using Camera Raw to finalize your artwork. So basically we just start with the light settings here, and this is obviously a very subjective process, but I'll just talk you through some techniques and ideas around using it. So you can actually with the latest version of Photoshop and Camera Raw, and this has been existent for quite a while, is you can just hit auto. And what it's going to do is Photoshop's going to automatically apply some settings to the artwork just to, based on Photoshop's algorithm, create an artwork, like create a preset for how it thinks your artwork, what needs to be fixed for it to look a bit better. So if I just undo that, yeah, you can see it's it's made some changes here by bringing the highlights down, turning the shadows up, things like this. So I'm not going to use auto today because I'm just going to talk through some things. So with this process, yeah, it is subjective, but I'm just going to make some small tweaks to the artwork. So the exposure here is actually fine already. I don't feel like I need to make it too much brighter. I'll probably sit at about just 0.15. I'm going to turn up the contrast just to remove some of that soft kind of glow in the image. Again, it's totally subjective, but contrast will help bring the darks and the lights together with more clarity. So with the highlights, you can just bring those down a little bit. The shadows, I tend not to bring the shadows up too much. I'll probably just leave it about here. And I'm going to move on to color. Again, totally subjective. We can start to play with the the cools and the warms in the artwork, depending on what technique you might, what overall look you're going for. But if you click on any of these boxes here with the numbers, you can type the numbers in manually, or you can just click on them and use the up and down arrows to refine your selection more easily. So I like that it's kind of warm, but I'm going to bring it down a little bit cooler, just to about there. And with the tint, it's a similar thing. We can move into the green or move into the purple. I really kind of am just going to move a little bit further into the purples here, just because the green it looks good, but just for the purposes of demonstration, I'm just going to change the tint slightly. So now we can change things like the vibrance. The vibrance changes the saturation of certain colors in the image. It has an algorithm that it uses for vibrance, so it kind of helps separate the colors more readily. So we add some color separation by removing that vibrance slider, and then saturation, it's just overall saturation in the image as a whole. So I'm going to leave that around 6 there. So already with those basic tweaks and color tweaks, if I just click on before and after, you can see the difference here. It's already looking a bit better clarity wise. The other thing I want to talk about is in the effects panel here, we can start to add some texture to the image. You can soften it. So if you move the texture to the left, it will get softer, and if you move it to the right, it will get more clarity in the image. Even though there is a clarity slider, the texture is it's more of a finer clarity setting, basically. So because this is like a newborn portrait, and we don't want it overly sharp, and it depends what you want to do, but I'm just going to move that back just slightly. And with clarity, if we just play with the slider here, I'm going to move the clarity to about here. Now dehaze is actually a setting that helps to remove glow and like ambient haze from images. So you'll see it will actually remove some of that light glow from the image, but I kind of like it in the image, so I'm only going to just leave that at about 2. So vignetting is another lens effect that we can use, because we have our subject centered here, and because it's a portrait type photography and artwork, using a vignette is a nice little effect to put in at the end. Grain we're not going to worry about. Grain is if we would like to add noise to our image. So adding noise helps to kind of bring the image together to make it feel more composed and seamless by using a noise texture. A lot of graphics designers will use this, so perhaps we will actually use a little bit of grain in the image, and I'll just leave it about 20. Yeah. So if we look at before, after, it's just looking a little bit more. I just prefer the colors actually. So we're going to move on to the curve. The curve, it's basically what, if you were watching from the beginning, when we were using our curves adjustments, it's basically the same thing. It's like a final curves adjustment. But we've got these tweaks here where we can actually, instead of putting points on the curve manually, which you can do in here, we can actually just let Photoshop's algorithm control the lighting. So you'll see, like I talked about, the lighting is up at this top right section of the line, because we're moving from highlights to shadows. So you'll see Photoshop's actually called it lights and highlights, so it's even higher. So if you can think of the line here from the top here down to the left, it's the same here, like top right down to bottom left. So you'll see the line moving in those ways. So the curve is handy because we could adjust highlights. This is highlights and shadows in this section of the basic light editing, but if we move into the curve, we're using a different kind of algorithm to adjust the overall lighting and darks in the image. So I'm actually going to just turn the shadows up slightly, and darks, we'll just move them back to high, like just move them back to where they were. The lights, if we put too much light in the image, it can kind of become overbearing. Again, it just depends on what you prefer for your images. So I'll add a little bit of extra lighting here. And that's all I'm going to worry about for curves. If you would like to get into things like the color mixer, you can actually, Photoshop will allow you to, depending on what color it is, like if we move into the greens, you've got the hue, saturation, and luminance of different colors. So for the greens, if we wanted to change the hue of the green, we can actually start to manipulate it in that way. So if you want some more variance in your greens, you can actually slide it more to the left to get them becoming more yellow. Yeah, it's just dependent on what effect you're looking for. So yeah, I'm going to move that a little bit to the left. The yellows, no, see there's not a lot of effect in the image, like just slightly. So we're not going to worry about that. Not a lot of blues. The aquas are kind of down the bottom here. So if I move the aquas just this way, it creates a little bit more separation and vibrance in the image. So I'll just keep it just around here. And the rest of the colors I'm not going to worry about. You can play around with these settings if you feel comfortable. Color grading I'm not going to worry about too much today. We can actually then, even on top of color mixer and curves where we could adjust colors, we could actually add colors from these color wheels into each of the tones in the image. So being the mid-tones, the shadows, and the highlights, which is a lot like I spoke about earlier when we were doing color balance. So color balance is similar because we were changing the color balance of the mid-tones, highlights, and shadows. This is very similar, except we've got different sliders to work with. So yeah, you can play around with those depending on what effect you might like. So for this one, if I was leaning more into the direction that I had initially with the temperature change, I changed the temperature to be more cool. We could actually move the, I'm just going to leave that how it was, move the slider here in the direction, like mid-tones, making them more cooler. So I'm going to add a slight blue here in the mid-tones. And for the shadows, I'm going to just leave that how it was. Yeah, and the highlights, if we move them more back towards like gold, no, I'm just going to leave that how it is. So I think if I turn the mid-tone settings on and off, we've just added a little bit more coolness to the overall image here. Now the detail settings. The detail settings here, we can actually begin to sharpen up our image using the sharpening slider. And we can also apply noise reduction as well. So just to show you, I'm going to just go back to my effects and turn off the grain. And by doing that, we'll be able to see the effects of sharpening and noise reduction more clearly. So the more you tweak your image as a whole at the end by doing color adjustments, sharpening, noise reduction, adding grain, things like this, you actually make your image more. You make, how do I say it? It makes your image appear as though it was all composed and sitting correctly. It helps all of your elements kind of fit together more seamlessly. It's like adding a final touch to your composite to have everything seated nicely in your image. So it will help bring elements together. So if we sharpen, like if we move the sharpening slider, you can see that it's adding a bit of sharpness to the part of the baby here. So I'm going to move the sharpening just a little bit. I usually don't add a whole lot of sharpening to my images, so I'm going to sit at about 35. Noise reduction, you can play with noise reduction depending on what you think looks good. Like if we turn noise reduction right up, you'll see it's really softened out the image. So for the noise reduction, I'm just going to add it about 10, and that's just going to add a very light, gentle reduction of noise on the image. And that's all I'm going to worry about for that. So optics wise, you don't really have to worry about this. This is more for like if you're working with photographs from a camera where you've got fringing on the outskirts of the lens, and lens distortion, which we don't really have to worry about with this image. Lens blur, we won't worry about that. This is a Photoshop algorithm that attempts to apply lens blur. We already manually created some lens blur in the image, so I'm not going to turn that on today. And calibration, we don't need to worry about either. So that's kind of, if I go before and after, that's brought together the image, and it looks a lot nicer. So if I just put my grain back on at about 20, that's just added a little bit more noise to the image. So if we hit OK, it's going to apply that setting that we've just created onto our image. So the reason we made this a smart object was so that we could make changes to the final settings if we wanted to. So yeah, that pretty much summarizes doing a final post-process on your artwork. There's many different ways of doing post-processing, but I think just touching on the manual lens blurring idea that I shared before with matching it with the subject, and then a final camera raw is pretty much all you need to do when you're finalizing your artwork. So now that we've done that, the last thing is I'm going to show you how to export your image with maximum quality, and that will conclude the tutorial. So let's do that now.